She walked down the aisle in a custom silk gown, hiding a ceramic blade in her garter. Vivian was marrying Chicago's most ruthless crime boss purely to put that blade in his neck. But Alexander's wedding gift didn't just save his life. It exposed her darkest, deadliest secret. The heavy oak doors of St. Jude's Cathedral groaned open, and the scent of white lilies and frankincense washed over the vestibule. For anyone else, this was the happiest day of their life. For Vivienne, it was the culmination of a 16-month infiltration, a meticulously crafted lie that was about to end in blood. She gripped her father's arm. Her veil, a cascade of antique Chantilly lace, obscured the cold, dead focus in her eyes. Standing at the end of the aisle, flanked by men whose tailored Italian suits barely hid the bulges of their shoulder holsters, was Alexander Costello. Alexander wasn't a caricature from a mob movie. He was a 42-year-old titan of industry who sat on the board of 3 major real estate development firms in Chicago. He funded orphanages. He played golf with Senator Robert Hayes, who was currently sweating in the second row. But the FBI knew the truth. The RICO indictments that never quite stuck told the truth. Alexander Costello was the head of the most brutal syndicate in the Midwest, a man who controlled the docks, the unions, and the underground casinos from the Gold Coast to the South Side. And he was the man who had ordered the murder of Vivian's older brother, Arthur. The organ music swelled, a mournful, heavy requiem disguised as a wedding march. As Vivian stepped down the aisle, the flashbulbs of society photographers popped, blinding her momentarily. Outside, she knew plainclothes feds were taking telephoto shots of the license plates of every Maybach and armored Cadillac lined up on State Street. Just a little longer, Arthur, she thought, her heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. Tonight, the Costello Empire loses its king. Arthur had been a low-level accountant, a numbers guy who got in too deep washing money for the Costello family through a string of offshore shell companies. 18 months ago, his body was pulled from the Chicago River, weighed down by cinder blocks. The police called it a suicide, a laughable conclusion to anyone who saw the 3 entry wounds in the back of his skull. The Costello family had cleaned house, silencing a potential liability. To get her revenge, Vivian hadn't bought a gun and charged the gates. She had weaponized herself. She reinvented her identity, scrubbing her connection to Arthur. She became Vivian Rossi, an independent art appraiser. She orchestrated a chance meeting with Alexander at a charity gala at the Field Museum, knowing his weakness for Renaissance art and sharp-tongued women. She made him chase her. She made him trust her. She made him fall in love. Now she stood before him at the altar. Alexander reached out, taking her trembling hands in his. His palms were calloused, the hands of a man who hadn't always worn bespoke Tom Ford. His eyes, a striking, piercing pale blue, locked onto hers through the veil. There was a terrifying stillness to Alexander. He never raised his voice, never lost his temper. He destroyed lives with a whisper. "You look breathtaking," Alexander murmured, his voice a low rumble that barely carried over the priest's Latin opening prayers. "So do you," Vivian lied smoothly, forcing a shy smile. Judge Thomas Cleary, a man firmly in Alexander's back pocket, was officiating the ceremony. As he droned on about the sanctity of marriage and eternal bonds, Vivian's mind drifted to the master suite at the Drake Hotel. Tucked discreetly into the delicate lace of her thigh garter was a 4-inch ceramic blade. It was untraceable, invisible to metal detectors, and razor-sharp. She knew Alexander's routine. After the reception, he would pour them both a glass of Macallan 25. He would turn his back to look out over the Chicago skyline. And that was when she would drive the blade directly into his carotid artery. "I, Alexander, take you, Vivienne," he recited, slipping a 6-carat flawless diamond onto her finger. The cold metal sent a shock up her arm. "To have and to hold, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." He emphasized the last 5 words, a subtle weight in his tone that made the hairs on the back of Vivienne's neck stand up. She pushed the paranoia down. "He doesn't know. He can't know." She repeated her vows flawlessly, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings of the cathedral. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander lifted her veil. For a fleeting second, looking into those ice-blue eyes, she felt a dangerous pull. He had been charming, protective, and intoxicatingly charismatic over the past year. But then she remembered the morgue. She remembered the smell of the river water on Arthur's skin. Alexander kissed her. It was a claiming, possessive kiss that drew scattered applause from the pews. Vivienne kissed him back, sealing her trap. The reception at the Palmer house. Hilton was a blur of opulence and veiled threats. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables filled with mob capos, corrupt aldermen, and oblivious socialites. Vivienne played the perfect Mafia bride. She smiled for the cameras, danced with Alexander's terrifying right-hand man, Matteo, and drank just enough champagne to calm her nerves without dulling her reflexes. Throughout the night, Alexander kept his hand on the small of her back. It was meant to look affectionate, but to Vivienne, it felt like the heavy grip of a warden. Every time she looked up at him, she found him already watching her, a strange, unreadable smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. By midnight, the band was playing a slow jazz standard, and the older bosses were retreating to private rooms with their cigars. Alexander leaned down, his lips brushing against her ear, sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. "It's time to go home, Mrs. Costello. I have a wedding gift waiting for you. Something highly exclusive." Vivienne's heart hammered against her ribs. Perfect, she thought. Let's go open it. The penthouse suite at the Drake offered a panoramic view of Lake Michigan, its black waters reflecting the glittering skyline of Chicago. The room smelled of expensive leather, fresh roses, and rain. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut, and the deadbolt slid into place with a resounding, metallic thud. They were finally alone. Vivienne slipped off her silk heels, letting her toes sink into the plush Persian rug. Her hand instinctively brushed against her thigh, confirming the reassuring outline of the ceramic blade beneath the layers of tulle and silk. Alexander walked over to the antique crystal decanter, resting on a silver tray. He didn't turn on the main lights, leaving the suite bathed in the amber glow of the city outside. He poured 2 measures of Macallan, the amber liquid splashing softly against the heavy glass. "Tired?" he asked, not looking back at her. "A little," Vivienne said, taking a slow step toward him. 2 more steps, she calculated. When he hands me the glass, I'll drop it. When he looks down, I strike. It was a long day, Alexander agreed. He picked up both glasses, but didn't turn around. Instead, he stared out at the reflection of the room in the floor-to-ceiling windows. Weddings are fascinating rituals, aren't they, Vivienne? A public declaration of trust. 2 people promising to bare their souls to one another. No more lies. No more secrets. Vivian stopped. Her blood ran cold. The tone of his voice had shifted. The warm, affectionate husband was gone. This was the voice of the man who ran the Costello syndicate. Alexander finally turned. He didn't hand her the drink. He set them both down on the coffee table. He then walked over to a heavy mahogany desk in the corner and picked up a sleek obsidian velvet box about the size of a jewelry case. "I told you I had a gift for you," he said softly, walking back toward her. He extended his hand, offering the black box. A groom is supposed to give his bride something that symbolizes their future. But I think, in order to have a future, we need to clear up the past. Vivian stared at the box. Her breathing grew shallow. "Alexander, what is this?" "Open it, sweetheart." Her hands were shaking as she took the box. It was heavier than it looked. She pressed the silver clasp, and the velvet lid popped open. Inside, there was no diamond necklace. There was no key to a new Ferrari. Resting on a bed of black satin were 3 items: a small silver USB drive, a printed bank ledger with a series of offshore Cayman Island routing numbers, and a heavily worn silver Zippo lighter with the initials AR engraved on it. Arthur's lighter. The room spun. Vivian's carefully constructed world fractured instantly. She looked up at Alexander, her mask of the loving wife, crumbling. "Arthur's lighter," Alexander said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He took a sip of his whiskey. "He dropped it on the docks the night my men caught him trying to skip town. You remember Arthur, right? Of course you do. You share his eyes." Vivian took a step back, her hand moving instinctively toward the slit in her dress to reach her garter. "I wouldn't do that," Alexander advised, not even blinking. "The ceramic knife in your garter is a nice touch, very professional, but if you pull it, Matteo and 3 of my men will breach that door before you clear the silk." Vivian froze. Her mind raced, violently trying to calculate how he knew. How long has he known? "You think you're the predator here, Vivian," Alexander continued, slowly pacing around her like a wolf circling a wounded deer. "You think you spent the last 16 months infiltrating my life to avenge your poor, innocent brother who got caught in the crossfire of the mob. You think I had him killed because he lost my money." "You did," Vivian spat, her voice finally breaking its polite facade, dropping into a venomous hiss. "I was an accountant, a pawn, and you butchered him and threw him in the river." Alexander stopped pacing. He looked at her, not with anger, but with a chilling, profound pity. "Is that the story you tell yourself to sleep at night?" Alexander asked softly. He pointed to the black box in her trembling hands. "Plug that USB drive into the laptop on the desk. Go ahead. Do it." Vivian hesitated, but the absolute command in his voice left her no choice. She walked over to the desk, her hands shaking violently, and inserted the drive. A single audio file popped up on the screen. "Play it," Alexander ordered. She clicked the file. Static hissed through the laptop speakers, followed by a voice. It was a voice she knew better than her own. It was Arthur. "Please listen to me," Arthur's voice begged on the recording, thick with panic and tears. "You have to understand, I didn't steal the 50 million. I didn't touch the syndicate's accounts. It was her." Another voice spoke on the recording. It was Matteo, Alexander's enforcer. "You expect me to believe your little sister hacked our offshore servers? She's an art appraiser, Arthur. She's a ghost, Arthur sobbed hysterically. She's been running crypto scams since college. She used my security clearances. She drained the accounts and routed them through dummy corporations in Geneva. I found out yesterday. I was to tell Alexander. You have to believe me. I didn't take the money. Vivienne did. She framed me so she could vanish with the cash. Vivienne slammed the laptop shut. Her chest heaved. The color drained completely from her face. Arthur didn't steal from me, Vivienne, Alexander said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You did. The truth hung in the air, toxic and suffocating. Arthur hadn't been an innocent victim. He had discovered Vivienne's massive cyber theft. She had stolen $50 million from the Costello syndicate, framing her own brother, assuming the mob would just write him off as a thief on the run. She never expected the mob to catch him before he could flee. When Matteo brought me that recording 18 months ago, Alexander said, walking up right behind her, so close she could feel the heat radiating off his suit. I was fascinated. A brilliant, beautiful woman who steals $50 million from the Chicago mob, sacrifices her own flesh and blood to take the fall, and then has the absolute audacity to invent a revenge fantasy, pretend to be a grieving sister, and marry the boss just to kill him and erase the only person still looking for the money. Vivienne spun around, her back against the desk. She was trapped. Arthur was going to give me up, she whispered, her voice trembling. He was going to hand me to you to save his own skin. So you hired the crew that hit him, Alexander finished for her. Vivienne's breath caught. That's right, Alexander smiled, a cold, empty expression. My men didn't kill Arthur. Before Matteo could even bring him to me for questioning, a drive-by hit squad lit up the alley. 3 bullets to the back of the head. Very professional. Very expensive. The kind of hit you pay for with $50 million in stolen syndicate money. Alexander reached out and gently tucked a stray piece of hair behind Vivienne's ear. She flinched, but he held her jaw firmly in his grip. You didn't marry me for revenge, Vivienne, Alexander whispered, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. You married me for survival. You married me to kill the man who knew your secret. But I've known from the moment you walked into that museum. So why? Vivienne choked out, tears of sheer panic welling in her eyes. Why go through with the wedding? Why let me get this close? Why not just kill me in an alley like I did to Arthur? Alexander leaned in, his lips brushing against hers in a twisted mockery of their vows. Because my beautiful, ruthless wife, he murmured. $50 million is a lot of money. And a woman who can steal it, frame her own family, and look me in the eye at the altar without blinking, is exactly the kind of monster I need, ruling this empire by my side. Welcome to the family. The silence in the penthouse was absolute, broken only by the distant, muffled wail of a police siren on the streets far below. Vivienne stood frozen, the phantom weight of the ceramic blade in her garter, suddenly feeling less like a weapon and more like a foolish child's toy. Alexander's thumb continued its slow, hypnotic trace along her jawline. He wasn't looking at her with anger. There was no outrage over the stolen $50 million. No righteous fury over the betrayal of his syndicate. Instead, his pale blue eyes burned with a dark, consuming admiration. It was the look of a man who had finally found the one thing money couldn't buy, an equal. Slowly, deliberately, Vivienne reached beneath the layers of Chantilly lace. She withdrew the white ceramic blade. Alexander didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He simply watched her as she turned her wrist and dropped the knife. It shattered against the hardwood floor with a sharp, pathetic crack. "You're insane," Vivienne breathed, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "You knew I ordered the hit on Arthur. You knew I stole your money. And you let me sleep next to you. You put a ring on my finger." "I did," Alexander replied, finally stepping back to pick up his glass of Macallan. He took a slow sip, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because for the last 10 years, I've been surrounded by sycophants, brutes, and old men who solve their problems with car bombs. The Costello family is bleeding, Vivienne. The FBI is tightening the noose with these RICO charges, and the Maroney family is encroaching on our ports. Brute force is a dying currency. The future of this empire isn't in shipping containers or extortion. It's in the digital ether. It's in offshore shell games, crypto laundering, and corporate espionage." He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the glittering expanse of Chicago. "When Matteo brought me that recording, I was supposed to have you killed," Alexander continued, his voice echoing off the glass. "But then I looked into how you actually pulled it off. You didn't just guess Arthur's passwords. You bypassed biometric security on 3 separate banking servers in Zurich, routed the funds through dummy corporations in Singapore, and scrubbed the digital footprint so thoroughly that my best hackers spent 3 weeks chasing a ghost." Alexander turned back to her, a terrifying smile playing on his lips. "You stole $50 million right out from under the most dangerous men in the city, and you did it while sitting in a Starbucks in Lincoln Park. You're a predator, Vivienne. You wear designer dresses and play the blushing bride. But underneath it all, you're a colder, more efficient killer than any soldier in my crew." Vivienne stared at him, her mind racing to adapt to the shifting paradigm. The sheer terror that had gripped her chest a moment ago was slowly morphing into something else. Something dark. Something thrilling. For a year and a half, she had played the role of the grieving sister, the innocent art appraiser. She had suppressed her true nature to survive. But Alexander was peeling back the mask, and he wasn't repulsed by the monster underneath. He was offering it a throne. "So what is this, Alexander?" Vivienne asked, her voice dropping its trembling edge, returning to its natural, calculating smoothness. "A partnership? A marriage," Alexander corrected softly. "In every sense of the word. I provide you with absolute protection. The FBI, the Maroneys, anyone who ever comes looking for Arthur's killer. They hit a brick wall made of my men. In exchange, you become the architect of my new empire. You launder our capital. You modernize our infrastructure. And you bring that $50 million back into the family." Vivienne crossed her arms, a genuine smirk finally breaking through her shock. $40 million. I had to pay a premium for the hit squad to make sure Arthur couldn't talk." Alexander actually laughed, a rich, dark sound that vibrated through the massive suite. $40 million, then. Consider it your dowry." "And if I refuse?" Vivienne asked, tilting her head. "If I decide I don't want to be the Mafia queen of Chicago?" Alexander didn't answer immediately. He walked back to the desk, closed the lid of the obsidian velvet box, and slid it toward her. "Then Matteo walks through that door, and we finish the business Arthur started. The choice is yours, Mrs. Costello. But I think we both know you didn't claw your way to the top of the food chain just to throw yourself off the balcony. I was right." Vivienne had sacrificed her only family, her identity, and her soul for power and survival. She looked at the shattered ceramic knife on the floor, then at the man standing before her. Alexander was ruthless, brilliant, and utterly captivating. He was the devil, and he was offering her the keys to hell. Vivian walked over to the table, picked up the second glass of whiskey, and raised it in a toast. "To a long and prosperous marriage," she said, her eyes flashing with dangerous intent. Alexander clinked his glass against hers. "Until death do us part." The fragile truce of their new alliance was tested sooner than either of them anticipated. Less than an hour after the revelation in the penthouse, a heavy, urgent knock rattled the mahogany doors. Alexander set his glass down, his expression instantly shifting from the amused husband to the syndicate boss. He gave Vivian a look, a silent command to play her part, before unlocking the door. Matteo stood in the hallway, his tuxedo disheveled, a thin sheen of sweat coating his forehead. He was a massive, scarred man who had been Alexander's enforcer for 15 years. Behind him stood 2 other armed guards. "Boss," Matteo said, his voice tight. He glanced suspiciously at Vivian, who was casually swirling the amber liquid in her glass, the shattered ceramic blade kicked discreetly under the rug. "We have a problem. The Maroney crew just hit one of our warehouses on the south side. They didn't take the cargo. They torched it. The police are already swarming the block." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Lorenzo Maroney doesn't have the muscle for a direct hit like that, unless he knows our patrol routes. Who gave him the schedule?" "I don't know," Matteo said quickly. Too quickly. "I'm locking down the hotel. The feds might try to use this as an excuse to crash the reception." Vivian watched Matteo carefully. Her heart beat in a steady, cold rhythm. During her 16-month infiltration of the Costello family, she hadn't just been planning to kill Alexander. She had been mapping their entire digital ecosystem. She had backdoor access to every burner phone, every encrypted server, and every offshore account the syndicate possessed. And she knew exactly why Matteo was sweating. "It's funny you mention the patrol routes, Matteo," Vivian said, her voice cutting through the tension like glass. Matteo stopped, his eyes narrowing at her. "Excuse me." "Vivian," Alexander warned softly, though he didn't stop her. She walked slowly toward Matteo, the silk of her wedding dress whispering against the floorboards. "When I was acquainting myself with the family's finances a few months ago, I noticed a very strange anomaly in the payroll servers. Large sums of cash were being siphoned from the union dues and routed into a shell company in Panama, a company called Red Iron Holdings." Matteo's face went perfectly pale. "I don't know what the hell she's talking about, Alexander. Shut her up." Alexander didn't look at Matteo. He kept his eyes locked on Vivian, utterly fascinated. Go on, sweetheart." "I thought it was just standard skimming," Vivian continued, circling Matteo like a shark. "But then I dug a little deeper. Red Iron Holdings isn't just a slush fund, it's a joint account. The other signatory? Lorenzo Maroney." "She's lying!" Matteo roared, his hand dropping dangerously close to the holster beneath his tuxedo jacket. "She's the rat. She stole the 50 million, Alexander. You know she did. I brought you the recording of Arthur." "Oh, I definitely stole the 50 million. Vivian smiled brightly, a terrifying, beautiful expression. "But I didn't sell out the Southside Warehouse tonight." "You did, Matteo. You've been feeding Maroney our supply routes for 6 months in exchange for a 20% cut of his narcotics trade. You thought Alexander was going soft by focusing on real estate and the tech sector. You thought you could stage a coup. Boss, she's a manipulative bitch. You can't listen." "Laptop," Alexander commanded softly, cutting Matteo off. Vivienne walked over to the desk, opened the laptop she had used to play Arthur's tragic confession, and tapped a few keys. A sprawling spreadsheet of wire transfers and intercepted encrypted text messages flooded the screen. She turned the screen so Alexander could see. Alexander read the screen in silence. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. When he finally looked up, his eyes were dead, devoid of any humanity. Matteo saw the look and panicked. He drew his weapon, aiming it directly at Vivienne's chest. "I'm taking her out, boss. She's poisoned your mind." Before Matteo could even fully disengage the safety, Alexander moved. The speed was blinding, a terrifying reminder of why he was the undisputed king of the underworld. Alexander drew a suppressed Sig Sauer P-126 from his waistband and fired twice. Pfft, pfft. Matteo collapsed backward, the gun clattering uselessly to the floor. The two guards in the hallway froze, their hands hovering over their weapons, staring in shock at the bleeding body of their captain. Alexander didn't even blink. He calmly ejected the magazine, checked the chamber, and holstered the weapon. He looked at the two guards. Matteo was a traitor working for Moroni. Wrap him in a rug, take him down the freight elevator, and drop him in the foundation of the new casino project. If I ever hear a whisper of this, you'll both be joining him in the concrete. Understood? "Yes, boss," the guards stammered, rushing forward to drag the body out of the suite. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut once more, leaving Alexander and Vivienne alone with the smell of cordite and copper in the air. Alexander walked over to a velvet armchair, sitting down heavily. He looked at the small pool of blood staining the Persian rug, then looked up at his new bride. Vivienne hadn't screamed. She hadn't flinched. She was standing exactly where she had been, a calm, analytical expression on her face. "You knew about Matteo for months," Alexander stated, his voice a low, rough murmur. "I did," Vivienne admitted. "Why didn't you use it sooner?" "I was saving it as an insurance policy," she replied, walking over and pouring him a fresh glass of whiskey. She handed it to him, her fingers lightly brushing against his. "In case I failed to kill you tonight, I figured handing you a traitor would buy me enough time to escape." Alexander took the glass, his eyes scanning her face, searching for any trace of the terrified girl who had walked down the aisle an hour ago. There was none. Only the icy, brilliant tactician remained. "You're a terrifying woman. Vivienne Costello," Alexander said, a genuine note of reverence in his voice. "And you are a monster, Alexander," she replied softly, leaning down to press a kiss to his forehead. "But you're my monster now." She walked over to the window, looking down at the flashing red and blue police lights racing toward the south side. The war with the Moroni family had just escalated. The FBI was circling. The Costello syndicate was bleeding. But as Vivienne looked at her reflection in the glass, framed by the sparkling skyline of the city she was about to help conquer, she felt absolutely nothing but power. She had married the boss for revenge. But in the end, she had gained something much more valuable. She had gained the throne. Wow, what an intense twist. If you were hooked by Vivienne and Alexander's dark and deadly alliance, hit that like button right now. Do you think Vivienne will eventually betray him, or are they the ultimate mafia power couple? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Don't forget to share this story with your friends and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling, jaw-dropping romantic suspense and real-life drama. See you in the next video.